Yeah, keep on putting your name in the chat. Lauren will keep on letting new participants in. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be talking all about pack sheds today, specifically enclosed pack sheds. This is a one webinar in a series of webinars that the University of Minnesota Extension has been hosting for fruit and vegetable farmers. So thank you for joining us today. And my co-hosts will introduce themselves when they speak, but I will introduce myself, Annalisa Hultberg, and I'm a statewide extension educator in food safety at the University of Minnesota. You can go to the next slide, please, Ariel. So our program, just so you know, we do trainings. We help folks with the Food Safety Modernization Act, Produce Safety Rule. If you have questions about that, good agricultural practices or a gap audit, any sort of technical support around food safety, reviewing a food safety plan, selling to a wholesaler that has requirements for food safety, our program can help you. So feel free to reach out and review our resources. All right, next slide, please. We have two more topics after today, and next is post-harvest equipment, brush washers, barrel washers, wash tanks, and then the final one is coolers on the farm. So we hope that you join us for those. And our agenda here today is Ariel will kick us off really talking about matching pack sheds to your needs on your farms, and then some of the specific, really essential pack shed components that all farms should have. And then we have a great guest speaker in Joan Olson, co-owner of Prairie Drifter Farm. So thank you very much, Joan. We're really excited to hear your expertise and experience. Next slide, please. GAPS, good agricultural practices, they're just those food safety practices we take to reduce risk, microbial contamination to our produce. So next slide, we're going to talk through just real briefly the food safety as it relates to pack shed equipment. So if you could go forward, this is on these like this. So we've got, here are some key hygienic design principles as they relate to pack shed equipment. So this comes out of University of Vermont. Chris Callahan and their team have done some great work around really identifying some of the key food safety concepts for pack shed equipment, pack shed buildings. Number one, smooth and cleanable surfaces, walls, floors, equipment that is smooth, non-porous, easy to clean. It might be made from stainless steel, hard plastics, or could be concrete with epoxy coating. No collection points. So this means avoiding cracks or crevices or bumpy welds. Think about your equipment. Is there areas where water and bits of produce and therefore bacteria might build up and be very difficult to clean out later? You should have visible and reachable surfaces whenever possible. Sometimes our equipment can be made in a way that makes this pretty difficult, but in general, thinking about being able to reach and clean the surfaces of your equipment. Material. What material is the product made from? Is it non-toxic, and is it not going to react with water over time and get really rusty, or with sanitizers? If we're using sanitizers, sometimes things are going to break down in the presence of some of the acids in our sanitizers. Proper drainage and water management means reducing standing water in post-harvest areas. We have a lot of water. We're doing a lot of washing. We might be hydrocooling. And so where is that water going? Do we have a plan to really try to get that water out so it's not puddling at our feet? And preventing cross-contamination. So our pack shed flows, having dirty and clean areas in the packing areas so that we are coming in dirty and we're leaving clean, and we're not then cross-contaminating and having our clean product go back and touch our area where our dirty product was stored and recontaminating it. Yeah, and that was based on some ideas from the University of Vermont. So just a few pictures to kind of get us started here. So this is a sink, a 3-compartment sink that a farm had in their packing area. It was a converted barn, and they got this sink free, side of the road. But write in the chat, what are some issues that you see with this sink? based on the concepts around hygienic design you just heard me say? What are some issues? Yeah, it's quite rusted. And I will say that they were using a sanitizer in their wash water, which is a great idea and a great way to reduce cross-contamination in post-harvest. But over years, that sanitizer really corroded the metal. So it wasn't a food safe sink. It wasn't a stainless steel that wasn't going to react. So they ended up getting rid of this. It was what they had for a while. They did their best until they really started thinking about some of these concepts, and then they replaced it. Okay, next. This is just a larger shot of the packing area. You know, they were doing the best with what they had, but they were using an old bathtub, and I would think about the material compatibility there, what kind of products might be in the enamel of an old porcelain bathtub. It wasn't made for food. They also, their spray table was starting to react on the very edge. You can see just a little bit of their spray table that they were using for spraying off some of their root crops. And that was getting pretty rusty as well. So that area also was not great for food safety. And in general, it was just a really old building. And of course, we convert many old buildings. But from a cleanability point of view, the walls there just being all wood, of course, the walls themselves aren't a food contact surface, but they become very hard to clean, and there's a lot of water. So you're going to have rotting wood, and it's going to be difficult to clean if you've got mice and things running over it. So they were able to upgrade after this. All right, next. And another packing area. So this was there's a lot good about this, I would say. We've got a nice poured floor. We've got some roofs overhead. Of course, birds might be able to fly through, but we've got shade, which is great. Hoses are coming down from the ceiling. I really like that. Keeps them up off the ground. But that's wood, right? There's wood as a food contact surface, and wood is a porous surface. It's not 100% banned. You can use it in your post-harvest area, but it isn't not ideal. So they were able to make some improvements here. Also, the spray table was made so that there was a lot of collection points of debris. So when they were washing things, bits would get stuck under that top 2x4 and made it pretty difficult to clean. So they were able to update that. But one thing they did well here, that's hard to tell, but the water was really well managed. So that water, they have that spray, that guard there so they didn't get their feet wet, which is really nice. But also the water went away. So it was graded, it went down through that spray table, and then the grade is such that it goes away, and then it went into a French drain and went away into into the field, or not into the vegetable field, but into the pasture. So that was, they were thinking through some things, and there was some area for improvement. But just to show you like some packshed ideas and areas that could be improved. And I think that is it for me. Oh yeah, last one. There's a wash tank here, and this was initially not made for food, right? It's rusty, it's bumpy, it's obviously had some sort of oil in it before. So they were using this to wash greens. And, sometimes I think we think, oh, let's save some money and wash some, use a product that we have on the farm. But at some point, it's just not worth it. So they got rid of this and bought a new livestock tank of just, hard, rigid foam that they were able to use to wash their lettuces in.
Sorry, Melissa, I think I muted you by accident. Um, all right. Do we have everything set up okay, Lauren? Me? Okay, great.
Yep, looks good.
Thanks. Okay, well, great to see everybody again. I hope a lot of you were able to make our last session where we're going over lower cost pack sheds. My name is Ariel. I'm the former owner of Seed to Seed Farm. We were a 15-acre certified organic vegetable farm in Polk County, Wisconsin. And now I work as a consultant with a bunch of different organizations, including Extension, where I do a lot of work with Annalisa on food safety, post-harvest practices on vegetable farms. So I'm really excited for this presentation. last time when we were talking about these lower cost pack sheds, we were coming at it from the perspective of if we're smaller farms, we have limited resources, we're on rented land. There's a lot of reasons you might want to put up those lower cost pack sheds. Now we're going to talk about what it might look like once you have more resources, some land tenancy, maybe you're scaling up your farm. And I can just say personally, I've been in both boats. I started my farm as a half acre on rented land. I think last time in the presentation, I showed some photos of the Costco carport where I had my pack shed for years. And then I eventually bought my own farm where we were able to, renovate a larger structure, put down a concrete floor, build something more permanent that was more appropriate for a farm that we were scaling up. So we're going to be talking pretty big picture today. So I just encourage you again to kind of use this as a brainstorming session, really think through what your needs are, what you think your needs are going to be in the future, see what resonates with you, and then kind of pull out what you will as you're kind of thinking about your farm and your pack shed and how you want to do your post-harvest in the future. Okay, so just to start, the same reasons for a pack shed matter when we're building a larger permanent pack shed to when we were building the smaller, kind of less permanent pack shed we talked about last week. You want to have a pack shed because you need a controlled space to wash and pack your produce. That's essential to food safety. Having a pack shed where everything is set up the way you want it to be set up will increase your efficiency. That means you can do more produce processing. It means you can be more profitable on your farm. It also provides a controlled space to not just store your produce, but also store supplies and equipment. And produce with better post-harvest handling is not only more food safe, it's going to last longer, and that's going to help you sell better. So I think one thing we're going to find as we keep talking about these different sessions where we're going through how we set up pack sheds, how we think about our equipment, our refrigeration, food safety is always a primary thing we want to keep our eye on. But often if we're doing practices that are more food safe, the produce is also going to last longer. That's going to make us a better farm to work with. That's going to get us more customers and more customers that are kind of coming back. Okay, so just like last time, I wanted to take just a second to talk about the crop needs. Because in the end of the day, your pack shed should always be based off of the crops that you're harvesting. There are certain aspects of a pack shed that you may need based on certain crops, and there are other aspects you may not need at all if you're not doing crops like that. So as an example, if I'm not growing any potatoes or any other root crops that need to go in a barrel washer, I probably don't need a barrel washer. That's taking up a lot of space. It's going to cost a bunch of money. So generally, I like to divide crops into four categories for post-harvest cleaning needs. The first category is crops that are not washed. So especially in this environment, in this part of the country, we're almost never washing things like tomatoes and onions. Some crops are sometimes washed. So those are things like winter squash and zucchini. And one thing I'll say about that is whether you wash them will often depend on things like your soil type and your growing practices. So if you're growing winter squash or zucchini in plastic mulch, for example, you probably don't need to wash them before you're selling them. That was the case on my farm. If you're growing them, on bare soil, and especially if it's heavier soil, the type that's really going to stick, you almost certainly are going to need to wash them before you can sell them to customers. Some types of produce we are spraying. Those tend to be things that are in bunches. So generally things like bunched radishes, bunched carrots, bunched beets, pretty much anything that's in a bunch because we need the pressure from the spray to get all the dirt out from the bunch. And then some types of crops we're dunking. Those are often leafy greens because we need to bring the temperature down quickly in addition to washing them. So we're often dunking things like salad greens or bunched kale, spinach, any of those types of crops. But again, keep in mind, if we're not doing any crops that need to be dunked, we probably don't need dunk tanks on our farm. So just keep in mind what type of crops you're working with and what kind of needs they're going to have as you set up your pack shed, especially as you scale your pack shed. Okay, so something that is going to differ a lot compared to our last conversation. When we were talking about a temporary pack shed, we were kind of working on the assumption that we are running smaller farms. And by smaller farms, I don't mean super, super small. I think we're generally talking about farms that are going to be, say, $50,000 to $60,000 in sales or less are going to be most appropriate for those temporary pack sheds. You can certainly have permanent pack sheds for farms at that scale as well. But as we're talking about kind of the purpose of these more permanent pack sheds, what helps you pay for them, we're often talking about farms that are going to be a little bit on the bigger side. And that means things are going to change because obviously if we're bigger, we're growing more produce, and that means we're washing and packing more produce. So one of the biggest things to keep in mind in terms of your crop needs when you're setting up your pack shed is the bottlenecks that happen when you're harvesting large quantities of produce. Again, you can't paint with too broad of a brush, but generally smaller farms are probably doing a larger diversity of produce because they're going to farmers markets, or maybe they're doing a small number of CSA shares. And that means that the bottlenecks will be that you're switching crops constantly. As we're getting bigger, that often means we're harvesting larger quantities of the same crop. So all of a sudden, we're going from harvesting 10 cases of kale to 100 cases of kale. So you really have to think through, how are you going to address that bottleneck? What happens when 100 cases of kale come into your pack shed, and how can you get them washed quickly? One of the things that you can really do to be efficient is focus on minimizing the number of times you need to move produce. One of the things I often find with folks that are struggling with efficiency is they're just moving things too many times. So you might bring in all of those cases of kale, stack them in one place, then all of a sudden they're in the way. Now you need to go stack them somewhere else. Then you need to put them in the dunk tank. Try to figure out how you minimize the number of movements as you're going. The other thing I want to say is we're going to talk about the pack shed, but it's impossible to talk about the pack shed without talking about how you're harvesting. So if you have a bottleneck, you might also want to think through what your harvest strategy is. Maybe you don't want to harvest all 100 cases of kale, then have everybody go in the pack shed at the same time. Maybe you want to have two people harvesting and two people washing and packing, and then constantly run a hay wagon back and forth, so you can bring stuff from the field to the pack shed. But again, whatever you decide, I'd really encourage you, think about the bottlenecks, think about the efficiency. You can also think about this based on the type of crop. So some crops need to be processed quickly to avoid a decline in quantity, and those are generally going to be things that have greens on them. So those could be things like bunch radishes, where you've got the green tops, bunch greens like kale. Other crops aren't going to suffer too much from waiting, so you can kind of harvest all of them and then deal with it later. So you can think about items like winter squash or onions, and that may affect, again, how you think about the bottlenecks and how you think about the efficiency. If you're harvesting a lot of winter squash, it may make sense for you to have the whole crew in the field just spend all day harvesting winter squash, and then maybe wait for a rainy day where then you can process everything in the pack shed. But if you're harvesting those bunch greens or those bunch radishes where they're going to start wilting if they get left out for too long, you're going to need a different strategy. Labor needs are super important, especially as we're talking about scaling up our farm a little bit. That probably implies there's more than just one of us working on the farm or washing. That means you really need to think through how the pack shed is laid out so you can have teams of people working in there at the same time. So when you're thinking about your pack shed, or you're thinking about how you're going to scale up your farm in the future, I would give some thought to how many people do you think are going to be working on your farm, and how many people do you think need to be in that wash pack area at one time? I think one of the easiest ways to break that down is think in terms of teams and stations. So on my farm, we'd go, okay, we've got 6 people in the pack shed. It's not productive to have 6 people all trying to dump stuff and pull it out of the same dunk tank. So we've got 3 stations. We've got 3 tanks that are exactly the same size, and we've got 2 people working in each station. And we're going to make sure we have enough room between those different stations so people can move around and navigate the space without bumping into each other. That's also a way that you can process different types of produce at the same time. So maybe you've got a station where people are spraying off radishes, and then a different station where people are dunking leafy greens. Again, keep in mind, people need to be able to move around the pack shed easily. I think you're going to quickly find that if people are constantly bumping into each other, if you need to put your body in awkward situations where you're carrying heavy lugs of produce, it's going to get old pretty quick, and it's really going to affect the efficiency of your space. Along those lines, I think one general concept you can think about: keep clear lines open to access the most important parts of your pack shed. So there are certain parts of your shed where you may not need to access it on a regular basis. Maybe there's an area where you're keeping your invoice pads, for example. That might be a space you only go to once a day or once a week. Not so important to have an open, clear line to that place. Other places you're going to be going to constantly. So the classic is places like the cooler door, or where the water spigot is located, or the hand washing station. So make sure you have clear lines open to those spaces so people can easily get there and back to their station. That's going to save a lot of time, and it's just going to make the space much easier to navigate. Think through, we're going to talk more about equipment in the next webinar, but think through how many people are needed to efficiently use a station or a piece of equipment. So that example I just used where we're talking about the wash tank, you can have 5 or 6 people working out of the same wash tank, but I think what you're going to find is those 5 or 6 people are going to get the same amount done as 2 or 3 people, because all of a sudden everybody's tripping over each other. Two people are grabbing at the same bunch of kale. Nobody remembers what kale has been in the tub for 5 minutes versus 30 seconds. So think through the number of people that are needed. On the flip side, you might find equipment like a brush washer, which we're going to talk about next week, needs 3 or 4 people to reach its maximal efficiency. I know on my farm, we found that actually it was more like 4 or 5 people would help us be as efficient as possible with that equipment. And then there were other tasks like this gentleman that's spraying radishes, where we found that's just kind of a one-person job that doesn't require more than one person to reach maximal efficiency. Also, keep in mind, we always want to be safe on the farm because the safety of ourselves, of our employees is important, but also safety is efficiency. If people are hurting themselves, if people are putting themselves in danger, if people are just generally doing kind of sketchy farm things, that's by definition going to be inefficient. So keep people safe to keep them safe. Also keep them safe because that helps us be efficient on the farm, which helps us be profitable as we grow. Okay, so high level, before making any decisions about your pack shed, I think it's really important just think through the total square footage you need. I think too often we kind of work backwards. So what we really need to do is think about how big of a space do we need, not only today, but in a couple of years. If we're talking about building a permanent pack shed, we're talking about putting up a structure that's going to cost a lot of money, and I'll talk about some costs in a couple of minutes. So let's think about something that doesn't just fit our needs today, but we can reasonably grow into. Um, Also, make sure to consider what are you using the pack shed for. So for some people, they're literally just using it to wash and pack produce. For other people, they're also using it for dry storage or office space or a walk-in cooler. That's going to have a big effect on the total square footage. On my farm, we ended up needing a pretty large walk-in cooler because we had 15 acres. So we had a 16-foot wide by 40-foot long walk-in cooler. So you can do the math, and that was inside of our pack shed. That takes up a lot of space inside of the pack shed. So if we hadn't planned to have enough space for that, we all of a sudden would have either been using up most of our pack shed space just for the cooler, or we would have had to try to put the cooler outside or somewhere that would have been just more inefficient for our farm and our workflow. Okay, so we're going to go through some of the kind of essential packshed components. Again, I'm going to keep this pretty high level because this is going to vary so much depending on your situation. So just as a reminder, last week we were talking about some of these more temporary structures. So things like tents, fabric carports, things like that. If we're talking about more permanent structures, we're often looking at structures similar to these. And the price point is going to be a lot more. And really importantly, the costs I listed here are just the material costs. So maybe some of you are handy enough to put these up yourself. Maybe some of you need to hire somebody. I think it's usually a fair rule of thumb that the labor to build something will probably at least equal the cost of the supplies, although that's going to vary quite a bit depending on the area you're in. So you can see on the left-hand side, a more just kind of like open metal carport type structure. This one is built with all steel, which is probably why it's so expensive. That's going to cost you $11,500. And that doesn't come with a floor, it doesn't come with windows or a garage door. That's just the bare bones of the structure. On the right-hand side, you can see we're building something that has windows and garage doors. It's got a person door on the side, which by the way is super important. But in materials, now that's going to run you over $31,000. So you got to think really carefully and be honest with yourself about what your resourcing is. We talked about this last time. Everybody has different situations. Everybody has different levels of comfort with debt. They have different amounts of access to funding. Just be realistic with yourself and what you're comfortable with. Some people will be perfectly comfortable taking out a $31,000 loan to build that building on the right. Other people aren't going to be able to sleep at night if they have a loan that big. There's no right or wrong answer. You just have to be honest with yourself about what you're comfortable with. And again, keep in mind, because we're spending this much money, we want to build something that we can, keep using in future years. So if you're looking at the structure on the left, it would be a real mistake to build that for where my farm is today if I'm planning to double my acreage within the next 3 years, because it works today, and now all of a sudden we may not be able to use that building again in the future. Often with these buildings, you can add on to them or expand their space, but I think it's way better to just kind of start with the shell you're going to use for the reasonable future. One thing I will say with the building on the right-hand side, I mentioned the importance of the person door on the side. I think that's part of just efficiency in a space. I think you're going to find pretty quickly that if every time you need to go into a pack shed, you need to wait to open one of those large garage doors, it's going to get hard for people to flow in and out. And having multiple ways that people and produce can flow in and out of the building is going to help a lot with efficiency. So everybody's got their own idea of kind of how they want the people and the produce flow to work, but I like having multiple points of entrance and exit from a building. Okay, so one thing that we talked about a little bit last week is we don't necessarily need to put up a whole new building. And the reason being, if we go backwards here, again, this is really expensive. And I think for a lot of us, we're probably looking at this and going, hey, I'd love to have that building on the right. I do not have, $60,000 to buy the materials and put it up. So what are the other options? Oftentimes, if you own your farm or even if you rent your farm, there are already buildings on the farm. So I think it can often make a lot of sense to think about how we're going to repurpose or partially use the buildings on the farm to build out our pack shed. I know I'm working with one group of farmers right now. They're renting, but they just kind of asked for permission to use one of the old buildings and retrofit it, and the landowner let them do it. I've been on plenty of other farms where you can kind of use a structure that's kind of a half fit, but spend way less money retrofitting it and making it work. The one on the left, sorry for the poor quality photo, but I've been to a lot of farms, so they often have detached garages, and the garages aren't being used. Maybe they're not in excellent shape, but you already have the bones of the structure. I think that can work excellent, especially if you already have water service or electricity going out there. That's a huge part of the cost for a structure. So if that's already there, you're already way ahead. On the right-hand side, that photo is from Loon Organics. I think they did a really great job of, building a structure off of a structure. So that saved them a bunch of money. Maybe the inside of that barn was not appropriate for a pack shed at the moment, but they were able to use some of the space outside of it to kind of build a lean-to structure. Probably goes without saying, but if you have also been on a lot of farms, not every building is worth saving. And I think this is a very similar concept to what Annalisa was talking about before with, sometimes we don't want to save money by trying to reuse, say, a barrel that wasn't meant for food production for washing produce. These are both obviously extreme. In both of these examples, you're probably going to spend more money trying to fix up this type of building than you would just building one from scratch that would work for you. So maybe you can salvage some materials if you're super handy, but again, I would not feel very tempted to try to rehab these buildings that are probably better just being pushed over at this point. You can always get quotes from local contractors, but again, not every building is worth saving. And unfortunately, a lot of buildings on farms are often too dilapidated to be saved. Okay, we'll talk about the floor briefly. I think Annalise already talked about this a little bit. The biggest thing we need in a floor is we need something stable and easy to clean. So you can use rock or gravel. I would strongly recommend if you own your farm, if you're putting up a more permanent building, concrete is what you want. Concrete is going to be the best solution. Not only is it stable, it's easy to clean, it's a surface you can move pallets and things with caster wheels on over. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but as your farm grows, being able to push and move things is essential. You're not going to be able to do that if it's on rock or gravel. Okay, the next thing we need to consider is utilities. So there's obviously a lot of types of utilities. I just wanted to highlight three major ones that I think are important that I often see people overlooking. You've got electricity, you've got water, and you've got heating. So if we're running a larger pack shed, we almost certainly need electricity. We're going to have equipment in there. We're going to have lights. We're going to have a walk-in cooler. Those things take a lot of power. So before you start, try to calculate like what are your total electrical needs on the farm. Don't forget that you're going to probably include the electrical needs of your walk-in cooler. It's probably going to be running off of that box. And also plan for the fact that larger equipment often needs a 220 volt plug. So oftentimes, if we're talking about even a larger air conditioner for a cool bot, some of the brush washers or barrel washers, they're wired for 220. So make sure you have those outlets just from the get. And keep in mind when you're pricing things out, new electrical service or work is really expensive. Unfortunately, this is one of the few things I would not recommend you do on your own. I think this is something you want a professional for. And they really charge. I think on an average farm, if you're getting a box run out to it and getting things set up, it would not be uncommon to spend $8,000 to $10,000. So if you don't have electric yet, I would definitely get a quote and make sure you're kind of including that in how you're thinking about the cost of putting up a more permanent pack shed. Okay, water is probably the one non-negotiable. It's a wash pack area, so we need a way to wash the produce. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do, assuming you're not going to be putting in a new well, um, consider the gallons per minute of water that you have for washing equipment needs, and then base your equipment off those gallons per minute. So base it off of what your reality is, not what you wish your reality was. If you only have 3 gallons per minute, that's what we've got to work with. If you're lucky and you've got 20 or 30 gallons per minute, we can do things a lot more efficiently. Keep in mind that oftentimes what I see is the pack shed and the house and the irrigation are all running off of the same well. So keep in mind that if you're running multiple things at the same time, that's going to reduce how much water you have available for your pack shed. I know the farm I used to work on a long time ago in Osceola, they had very, very little gallons per minute. So anytime we were in the pack shed, that meant turning off the irrigation and it meant nobody could take a shower. So again, just be honest with you about kind of what your situation is. I would highly recommend running water directly into your pack shed with a frost-free hydrant. Sometimes you see the cost, you go, I just want to save a couple $1,000s. Can't I just run a hose? It's super convenient just having the water there. So I'd highly recommend spending the money just to get the frost-free hydrant run inside your pack shed. Okay, keep in mind some equipment will not be effective below a certain minimum amount of gallons per minute. Other equipment will work, but might just be less efficient. So as an example, there's something called an AZS rinse conveyor. I'm going to talk about that next week. That literally probably won't work with less than 5 gallons per minute of water. On the other hand, maybe you have large tanks that you want to fill. You can obviously fill them as slowly as you want. Just keep in mind it's going to take a while. So at 5 gallons per minute, if you have a 300-gallon wash tank, that's going to take an hour to fill. So you've got to be able to plan around that. If you have limited water, I would also caution you often can't fill and spray at the same time. So even on my farm where we had a lot of water service to our pack shed, filling up 2 dunk tanks and trying to spray off radishes at the same time, there just wasn't enough pressure. There wasn't enough water. So we had to be very smart about how we were doing things. I think one really easy way you can get around this is just plan ahead. Investing in an automated watering system, you can buy the thing on the bottom right-hand side here. You can buy that for $30 at a Menards. And I see a lot of farms set those up where you can just set the timer so the water is flowing, say, into your 300-gallon tank for 55 minutes. Then it'll shut off the water. You can spend that time harvesting in the field, and by the time you get back, the tank is full. Something like that is a really easy solution to work around some limitations if you have more limited water or water pressure. One component to consider is whether you need heating in your shed. I'd be curious what Joan has to say and some other farmers have to say. In general, for me, I would say if you're planning to wash and pack vegetables after November in this part of the country, you probably need a heated space to do it in. That's not just for your comfort, that's because you literally won't be able to wash vegetables if it's, say, 20 degrees inside of your pack shed. Obviously, the water is going to freeze, it's going to damage the vegetables. So if you're planning to do some more of that shoulder season processing or winter harvest and processing, I think you're almost certainly going to want to invest in a heated space. Just keep in mind that's going to add significant cost. That probably means getting a building that's insulated, and then you can either do something like in-floor heating or get a garage heater. But either way, that's going to add quite a few costs to what you're thinking about. One thing I've seen farmers do that I think is really smart is maybe just put aside a smaller piece of the pack shed space as your winter processing facility. So you don't have to insulate and heat the whole thing. Maybe if you have a 40 by 40 space, you go, okay, 10 by 20 of this, we're going to wall off and make appropriate for washing over the winter. And the rest of it, we're not going to invest that money to insulate and heat it. Lighting often gets overlooked. If you have a larger structure, like some of the ones we were looking at, the windows are almost never enough to get sufficient lights for kind of the food safety, the grading, the worker safety. Even when it's really sunny out, it's not enough light. And then you're going to have days where it's going to be overcast, or you're going to be processing in the morning or the evening where it's dark. So I'd really strongly recommend investing in supplemental lighting. And again, that's important for both food safety, like Annalisa talked about. You really can't clean stuff if you can't see it. It's important for grading. It's really hard to pick out the good tomatoes and the bad tomatoes if you can't see them well. And again, it's also really important for worker safety. If people can't see what they're doing, it's going to be really hard to stay safe. In almost all instances, I'd recommend just invest in overhead lighting. We tried doing some different things on my farm with floodlights and temporary ways to save some money. It never really worked. And then just keep in mind, you're almost certainly going to want to get lighting fixtures that are meant for a moist environment like you're in. So you want to get lighting that is moisture proof and vapor tight. Keep in mind that a lot of warehouse lighting is not designed for environments like pack sheds. and you do not want light bulbs blowing up if somebody sprays some water onto the ceiling or something like that. As you're scaling up your farm, everybody's different, but you're going to find a lot of farms as they're scaling up and building more permanent structures. The unit of movement is going to be pallets. And that's a way to efficiently move things on larger farms. So keep in mind that you're going to want to have spaces that you can move pallets through, and you want surfaces you can move pallets over. So that means smooth floors. That means thinking through the doors to your pack shed, the door to your cooler being something you could fit a pallet through. If that sounds too big for you, I've seen a lot of farms invest in mini pallet systems, which can be a way to kind of get some of the same efficiencies without needing doors that are as large or maybe some of the same surfaces. Okay, the last couple things, definitely consider receiving and shipping. I know people are probably looking at this picture and going, whoa, my farm's never going to be that big. And that's totally fine. Just consider how the produce is getting in and out. Consider if you're expecting large trucks to show up on a regular basis. On my farm, we didn't have a ramp or a loading dock. I actually bought that straddle stacker, which is on the right, which I really liked. It's about $4,000, I think, from Uline. It was a nice compromise where I didn't have to buy a forklift. I didn't need any, but it was a way where you could just electrically pick up pallets and load them in the back of a larger truck. Keep in mind you're going to want dry storage on the farm. That doesn't necessarily have to be in your pack shed, but I sure found it more convenient if it was. At a minimum, you're going to want to store harvest supplies like rubber bands and twist ties and harvest knives. I found having larger amounts of dry storage in my pack shed meant that we could buy things in bulk and we saved a lot of money. So on my farm, I would buy a truckload of wax boxes every year, sometimes once every 2 years, just get that many boxes. Because I was able to buy a truckload and buy them directly from the distributor and then store all of them myself, the wax boxes were literally half the cost than if I'd gone to Jordan's or the Good Acre or another place. So I think if you can plan to have enough dry storage area for things like that, it's a really nice option to have. And keep in mind too, you may want dry storage for produce. In a perfect world, we've got like three different walk-in coolers at three different temperatures. The reality is most farmers are just going to have one walk-in cooler. So on my farm, we would just store things like winter squash and tomatoes in the dry storage area. Definitely kept them segregated. We didn't want the tomatoes near anything else. But they lasted just fine for as long as we needed them, just in dry storage spaces of the pack shed. You definitely need shelving. I'm a big fan of shelving in all pack sheds. I'd encourage you just invest in the shelving that's appropriate for what you need it for. If you're just trying to hold general supplies like those rubber bands or twist ties, there's no need to go crazy. You can just buy some of the lower cost shelving you can buy at Home Depot or Menards. If you're going to hold like whole pallets of wax boxes, or you're expecting to put large amounts of produce on the shelving, I would definitely recommend buying some heavier duty pallet style shelving that's built for that much weight. And also consider, do you want to be able to move the shelving units around? So you can see this picture has casters on it. That doesn't add that much cost to the shelving. It's an extra 20 or 30 bucks. I'm a really big fan of being able to move pretty much anything you can move. I like to be able to move. It just makes the space a lot more workable and you can reorganize it whenever you want. But obviously not required, but just keep in mind before you start purchasing, do you want to be able to move things around? The last piece I'll say is office space. Obviously, office space is not directly related to washing and packing produce. I found it really essential on my farm to just have an office. Working out of my kitchen table or my bedroom got old really, really quick. I liked having the office space adjacent to my pack shed because so many of the supplies I would need for the office stuff, I'd also kind of need to be able to sell and ship my produce. So we had the label printer in there, we had our invoicing slips, everything like that. It was just nice having it in close proximity. So again, doesn't need to be there, but something to keep in mind as you're thinking about, the total amount of square footage that you want. All right, and I'll bring up this slide at the end again. So if you have any questions, you know how to get in touch with myself or Annalisa. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and really happy that we get to hear directly from Joan, who can share more about kind of her operation, her learnings with Packsheds.
All right, I'm going to reshare here. Okay. Thank you, Ariel, for all of that information and that great background. Um, I am the co-owner of Prairie Drifter Farm in Litchfield, Minnesota, with my husband Nick. We have a 33-acre farm, which you can see here. Actually, at any one time, we've only grown as much as 7 acres, and now we're down to just an acre and a half to 2. So we've kind of gone up and down in scale over the years. And similarly, we started off on rented land. We had a pop-up tent and a little trailer to keep our supplies and wash under. We were on about a half an acre as well. And when we bought this farm, in 2010, we were lucky in that we had an existing building there. This farm prior to us was, I should stop and say, we have a vegetable farm. Primarily, we have been CSA over the years. When we first started our farm, we had about 20 CSA members, and that was all we sold. At the peak, when we were at the highest amount, we had 250 CSA members. We were selling wholesale to schools, restaurants, taking to food shelves and a couple of co-ops as well. And now we've scaled back down again for various reasons. But over the years, that has meant that our packing area has had to change quite a bit. So the overhead map you see here, this is our farm. The circled area is our pack shed, which, like I said before, was existing. This was a cattle farm before we got here. So we had grazing cattle on part of the farm, which is in the central area here. So that building, when we got to our farm, was floor to ceiling filled with hay bales for the cattle. So we were glad that it was here, but obviously it had to be adapted because that's not what it had been used for before. So hopping up to this next slide, the blue building you see here, that is our pack shed. And we have made a lot of changes over the years, and it's looked different, I think, pretty much every single year. This is a little bit of an overhead of what our workflow looks like within the pack shed. So on the top here, this is the north side of the pack shed, which is the opposite side of what you can see here in the picture. On the bottom of this picture, you're looking at this rectangular area at the base is the lean-to that you see outside of the pack shed here, and the rest is in the interior. I put this up just to kind of show, just reiterating what both of our presenters have said about workflow. We found that to be incredibly important over the years. So here on our picture, the main part of the building was what we had when we moved here, and we did build this lean-to on, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But you can see the arrows are just showing how we flow through our pack shed. The red areas that you see are where our dirty produce comes in and sits. The blue areas are either wash tubs or screen tables or brush washer, barrel washer, things where we're doing the actual washing and processing of the vegetables. On the left-hand side here, it's in light red. This is where we store our air quotes dirty bins that go out into the field. So those are only for dirty produce coming out of the field, not for the clean produce. The green areas here are where we store the totes for our clean produce, and those two things do not mesh. They don't mix at all. And then the green area you see in the middle, when we were doing CSA, this is where we did our CSA packing. And then finally, the coolers are over here. We do have 2 coolers, and I'll talk about those in a moment too. Ariel mentioned storage. So we also have clean green storage. This is where our wax boxes are, our rubber bands, our freezer paper, all of those items as well. Couple things I wanted to mention about this, about, again, multiple entrances to the pack shed are really great. So this is a overhead garage door. When we moved to this farm, it was a sliding door, which was really frustrating. It would bang open all the time in the wind, and it wasn't really tight. Critters could come in. So some time ago, when we put this lean-to on, we did put in a cement floor pad here too, which meant we actually had to remove that sliding door. Once we entered the overhead door, it was just night and day, so much better. So it was a pretty significant cost to put that in, but really was helpful. We also had a sliding door here, and since then, this is what it looked like prior to putting the overhead door in. Now we do have an overhead door. Again, just a great change for us. Much easier to keep everything tight in the building. You can also see we have a man door on the side, which I would agree is really important. One thing I wanted to point out here on the workflow is you can see these 2 gray lines. These are drains that we had put in, and they do drain outside of the building, which you can see here. Just really important to get that dirty water and all that wetness away from the building so you're not creating a lot of pooling where you're working. So when we did arrive at this farm, our current pack shed, did have cement, so we were actually really lucky with that. We didn't have to put that in. However, it did not have a drain. So several years on, when we finally had enough money, excuse me, we actually had to take out this corner of cement out of the pack shed fully so that we could then grade it and then put this drain in here. So it was great to have the building already here, and we've used so much of it, but oftentimes you'll find that you have to adapt as well. On the bottom right, you can see this is our crew packing CSA boxes. You can see the coolers in the back. Just give a little sense of what it looked like inside before moving on. So a couple of elements that I just wanted to talk about, and they've really been mentioned quite a bit here too, but I'd say the first big one that's been really important to us is just the ability to be modular and to be adaptable. Our farm started off with 20 CSA members. It was me and my husband. At our peak, we had 250 members, and we'd have, on our biggest days, we'd have 6 to 8 crew members here. And so our space that we had really had to look different the more bodies we got and the more we were processing, just like Ariel said. So almost everything in our pack shed, and I'm going to go back here, almost everything in our pack shed is movable. Almost nothing is permanent. The only things that are permanent are our coolers. You can't really move those anytime fast. We have one shelving unit that is not on casters that's located here. This is our hand washing sink. Mentioned location there, right inside the door. That's been really important for us. And then the brush washer, we don't move that. It's just a little bit. We can move it. We built a rolling cart for it, but we generally don't. So that means that as we grew and as we changed and as bodies changed and crops changed, we're able to make this pack shed work for us and just move things and change. So like I mentioned before, this is the area where we actually had to take out this section of cement and then add it back in, but this time with a drain. That was really a game changer for us because it was so much easier to clean. It was easier to keep it dry. With that lean-to that I mentioned before, we used to do all of our washing and packing in this corner. And we were finding as we had more bodies in the building, this was just not very efficient. We did stumble over each other. The workflow was not good. And so when we put that lean-to in, we chose to put our dirtiest crops out onto the lean-to. So the lean-to is where we did all of our spraying of the root vegetables, all the muddy stuff. Our bale washers out there, our brush washers out there. More water flow is going on the lean-to. This inside area, this is where we're doing salad mix, broccoli, kale, kind of a lot of those leafy greens. This is where we do a lot of the sorting of things like peppers and squash and cucumbers, maybe things that we're not necessarily washing. Something else I wanted to mention, I'll go back to this workflow. You can see there's this red area here. So we use a lot of pallets in our farm. That red area is this. So this is where when the produce comes in, this is the area where we put the air quotes dirty produce that's coming in from the field. We don't want it sitting on the floor. We want it up off the floor. That pallet is on wheels, so we can move it around. We can roll it out to the lean-to and put heavier crops onto it if we need to. That's been really helpful as well. Finally, like I mentioned with the CSA packing area, this is all modular. We can take this all down. We can have the whole space usable for us as we need it. This is the area, just again, delineating between dirty and clean totes. These totes and buckets here are the ones that we use out in the field. Those would never get used for clean produce. All the totes in the bottom left here, these are all used for the clean produce once they've been washed. And that's what would end up going into the cooler. Just also wanted to mention, these are compost buckets. So we have those right next to the door. So the dirty culls, as you're peeling off leaves and other items that we don't need or bad crops, they're going to the compost and they get cleaned out every day. So we don't have that refuse sitting and attracting critters into the pack shed. Ariel mentioned lighting. That was really important for us too. So we added this overhead lighting about 2 years in, when we finally realized we couldn't see very well. And that we can change where those are if needed. But they've now been in a pretty good location for the last, I'd say, 10 years, and really haven't had to move them since. All right, I'm going to move on here. So also just wanted to bring out and highlight some of the things that have been said about food safety. I do food safety training in the off-season months, and I've been really grateful for that because we've learned so much that we've been able to apply to our farm. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that when we came into this building, we had these overhead trusses and we had a terrible bird problem. We had birds flying in all the time, roosting up on here, pooping on everything. So that first winter after our first year on the farm. You can't really see it, but there's now bird netting over the entire inside of the pack shed. We were able to actually get used bird netting from a friend who had a vineyard. We had very little money coming to the farm when we first got here. So we really tried to repurpose things as much as we could. And then we've been able to buy equipment as we've been able to purchase it. But that bird netting was just a game changer. Really helped us keep birds out and not having nesting problems anymore. As I look at the ceiling here and the bird netting, I wanted to go back for a moment. We talked about lighting. So I mentioned we have this lighting here that we put in. I also want to mention something. We have no windows in the pack shed, minus some windows in our overhead garage doors. And I really like a bright space. So our roof actually does have a clear peak that runs the entire length of the pack shed, and that lets in some natural light, so we don't have to depend completely on lighting. So if that is an option for you, that is a really a great idea for if you don't have windows, and that's maybe something you can do if you're changing. We actually just had to have our roof replaced this year, and they re-put that in, and again, just really a game changer for having a little bit of natural light if possible. Couple other things for food safety. So this area is where all of our cleaning supplies are, our gloves, our rags, our bleach, our hand soap, Sanidate, all of that houses here. And then mops, brooms, all of that is here as well. Going back to the workflow, this area is right here. Again, it's away from the food. We don't have our chemicals and things sitting close to where we're washing. It's away from the area, but still close and easy to access. This area is where we're storing all of our wax boxes. This is the one real cart that can't move. It didn't come with casters. We actually got this from a grocery store that was going out of business. And in fact, these two racks as well were from a grocery store going out of business. So that is something to keep in mind. These weren't places we were putting the food itself, but we were putting containers on. So we didn't mind having kind of an older shelf. So if you're getting started, that might be a place for you to look as well. This is where, just off to the left here, this is where we keep all of our harvest tools. Our food safety plan sits right here. We have our emergency plans here for if somebody would get injured. We have all of our numbers here. This is where we keep all of our cleaning logs as well. It's nice to have all this in a nice central location, easy to access, keeps it tidy. In a sense, this is our air quotes office. We don't have an office in our pack shed, not quite big enough for that. Our office is in our house, which is pretty close, but this is where all that paperwork stays, and it's away from the water, easy to get to, and it's a central location for everyone to be able to get to. I also just wanted to talk for a moment here about investments. I think this can be one of the more challenging things, is deciding where to put your money. If it's limited. And I'll say when we moved onto this farm, our money was extremely limited, like I mentioned. So because of that, you'll see that a lot of our things were repurposed. So we've used a ton of pallets over the years, which have been great. And we just put casters on all of them. And again, that makes our pack shed really modular, great to have it on that cement. It saves time, but also really has saved our bodies. I think over the years, your bodies really do start to notice if you're being hard on them. And ergonomically, we had to think a lot about heights of things. This is a good time to maybe talk about, again, we built these racks for our wash tubs. These are with pallets. My husband is 6'4". I am 5'4". So that is somewhat challenging when it comes to ergonomics. So we have some happy mediums about having some things taller for him. My husband would tend to be the one in the pack shed. So a lot of things are a little bit more built for him, but we also had work chairs that were more my height. So those are just things to keep in mind. We do have a lot of things built out of wood, but then it has a surface on top of it that's easy to clean and sanitize. Spray tables that have maybe a plastic top, even though the base of it is wood, because that's what we know how to build with. The nice thing about that over the years has been, if we do find and we've not hit something at the right height, we disassemble it, cut down the wood, reassemble it at a new height that works for us. When you don't have as much money, that just might be something you need to do. Okay, so other investments, like I mentioned, this lean-to we did put up. Really great that you mentioned power, because that was really an issue here for us. So our barrel washer needs a higher power as well. So our electrician had to put this electrical in. That was good to keep in mind. We added more than we needed at the time. We added extra outlets because it was kind of a what if. We didn't want that electrician to have to come back. So we put in more than we initially needed at that moment, but now we do use more of the electrical as we've grown. This is the brush washer that we've used as well. Also needs power. That power needs to be something that is safe in wet environments. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working with an electrician. Let them know what you're going to be using it for. Other investments over the years that have been really important. So coolers. This is the first cooler that we started out with. We got it for $250 at an old Subway. And this was great when we were smaller. We outgrew it relatively quickly. So we purchased this cooler used several years later. I wanted to mention something that Ariel said about size of doors. So this door on the left-hand cooler is significantly smaller than the one on the right. And if you're holding a tote of produce, you actually can't walk through straight. You have to walk through kind of sidewinder and get to the door, which actually is not very handy. It's challenging for everyone. This cooler is much wider. You can walk right through it with a tote of produce, and we can get our rolling carts in and out of there relatively easily as well. So that's just something to be aware of. If you have an option to get a bigger door, I would say get it because you don't know where you're going to grow from that point on. Just mention again, this is the lean-to that we added on. You can see the drain here that was added, graded so the slope would drain off. So if you're having somebody else do the work for you, really make sure that they know what you're planning to use it for, where you want the water to go so that they can help you design it in a way that's going to work best. These are all pretty big investments that I just talked about, but also some of the simplest investments have been the cheapest. Carts, rolling carts, saves for efficiency, time, moving things around, saving in your body as well. So sometimes the thing that you need, the investment that you need, is maybe more like a systems-based investment than a really heavy equipment, and that can go just as far with being a benefit to your business. One final thing I wanted to mention here, we talked about electrical a little bit. Something we put in a couple of years ago, we did put solar on the farm a couple of years ago. And when we were doing that, we had the opportunity to kind of re-envision what our power looked like. And something that has been weighing on our back of our minds over the years is what happens when we have a big storm and we lose power and we have a cooler full of produce. It hadn't happened yet, really grateful. But when we had our electrical redone, we had our electrical guy come in and put in this plug here, which is meant for this generator. So if we would lose power, we do have the option to plug that generator in. That generator can run the lights in our pack shed. It can run our coolers. It can also run our irrigation well, and it can run our greenhouse. So that took a huge load off. And funnily enough, the year after we put this in, we had to use it for the very first time. So just sometimes when you're thinking through investments, it's all the things you don't know about that might pop up. And just kind of be ready for, things that might happen. Be ready for your scale going up, be ready for your scale going down, be ready for your body to change as you get older. And those are all things to kind of think ahead through. This is all that I had for pictures. So I just wanted to stop sharing and maybe we can hop back on. I think at this point, we were maybe going to do a little bit of Q&A. I made a note to myself, Ariel, you talked about shelving. I wanted to say this too. So shelving with casters, I want you to keep in mind that if you buy shelving that does not have casters on it, and it's rated for a certain number of pounds, the pounds it can carry may change when you put casters on a shelf. We had a shelf that we had for tomatoes, and we put it on casters, and I came in one morning and our whole tomato shelf had tipped. And luckily it fell on another tomato shelf. So we only lost like 10% of our tomatoes, but had there not been another shelf there, we would have lost 100% of them. And it was because the weight rating of that shelf changed the moment we put casters on it. So I just wanted to keep that in mind if you're going to really load up your shelving as well. All right. You also mentioned, so I wanted to mention the hydrant as well. And you had asked about what we do for heating. Our building is not heated. We're a free season farm. We don't wash and pack in the wintertime. And our hydrant is actually located outside of our pack shed. So, and that is something to keep in mind, if you're going to be washing in the winter, having that hydrant inside where it's within the heated building is really important. If you're not going to be doing it in the winter, having that hydrant outside is maybe not such a big deal. And that is really going to change depending on, you already have cement in, are you starting from scratch and can put a hydrant in and then add your cement? all those things will change your decision.
I just want to say to follow up, I love that you brought up the point about the casters because something I always love to bring up to anybody thinking about anything on a farm is just keep in mind that if we are using something for the farm that was not built for farm or commercial purposes,
Mhm.
we are like way over the line for what it was intended for. And that's totally fine. Sometimes we need to do that to save money or repurpose something, but just keeping in mind that if it wasn't built for what we're doing, it's probably not going to last as long. It's probably not rated for the weight and the wear and tear.
Right.
So yeah, that's a really great thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah.
Lauren, did you want to go ahead with if we have questions or?
Yeah, there's no questions currently in the chat, but if you have questions, please post them in the chat. You can also unmute yourself. I'm also going to launch our poll here just to make sure that's up and running. And it does look like maybe we have a comment or question in the chat. It says, can you talk more about the cement flooring, smooth or grooved or rough, safety slash cleanliness, and in floor drain, cleaning, freezing, etc. costs? Also movable casters, wood, stainless steel, etc., and are hanging or suspending to avoid areas to collect debris and ease of cleaning.
Those are great. I could do a couple of those, Ariel, and then let me pass it over to you. Yeah, so we have smooth cement, easier to roll on, much easier to clean. Actually, a lot of our cleaning ends up doing it with a push broom and a hose does some of the best cleaning you can do on the floor, even more so than like a squeegee does. Our floor drains, you can remove the top of them. So that was actually on our cleaning schedule for our pack shed every 3 weeks. Sooner, if we were in really heavy root crop times where we get a lot of mud, we would just take the tops off the drains, clean them, spray them out, sanitize them, put that back on. So that's important to be able to disassemble your drain because you are going to get mud build up there. It is going to slow down the drains. Let's see. You also mentioned cleaning and freezing. Cost for us is mostly the time. We don't have to worry about freezing, so maybe you can talk about that. Yeah, so the equipment is really actually nice if you can have things on casters because, and even with all the shelving that I showed you in our pack shed and the pallets, we do every so often just take things away from the wall, wash, clean, spray behind. At the beginning of the season, we actually move our entire pack shed to one side, wash the whole thing, clean it all. We did put metal walls on our pack shed when we moved in. It had wood walls. Metal walls really help with cleaning. But then, yeah, it's great to have things movable so you can move mostly to clean. Also look for mice. You can see droppings much easier if you can move things away from walls. Yeah, walk-in coolers. So we have cement. It's just our cement floor and a walk-in coolers, but we have we bought metal racks that we place on the floor, so nothing ever goes directly onto the floor at our farm. So no wax boxes go on the floor; they go just up off the floor on a metal rack, or they're on a rolling cart where we're moving it in and out like that. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I'd probably just add in, so in 2 weeks, we're going to have a whole webinar on walk-in coolers. I do think one thing to consider is so normally walk-in coolers, if you're buying them, do not come with floors. Walk-in freezers will come with floors. Just keep in mind that it's about energy efficiency. So most walk-in coolers just sit on top of concrete, and that's totally fine, or cement. But keep in mind, you are going to lose some efficiency. And if you're doing something like a cool bot, where you're really kind of just repurposing an air conditioner for cooling, it's already undersized. And depending on the size of your space, that can become an issue. So just two things I'd recommend thinking about. If you're installing everything new, in my cooler, we put insulation below the cement before it was laid. So you actually have like an insulated floor that's built in that you can put the cooler box on top of. You may also just want to consider installing a floor. So we're going to show different ways to kind of build a floor in the next webinar. So if it doesn't come with one, you can build something. So you can definitely get away without it. I just especially get worried where I see people already pushing the limits of like a CoolBot cooler. And then because the cold air sinks, you're losing a lot of the efficiency when it's going through the floor. And then just plus one to everything Joan said as far as absolutely for food safety, whether it's flooring or directly on the cement or whatever, we never put produce or produce contact stuff on the floor. So having like dunnage racks or wire racks, pallets, whatever works for you. But that tends to, in my experience, be one of the grossest parts of the farm because the cooler needs to be completely empty to really clean it well, and it's almost never completely empty. So just really, yeah, making sure you're keeping stuff safe there.
Awesome. Any other questions? Again, you can unmute if you want, or you can put questions in the chat. And if there are no more questions, do either of you have any additional comments you want to make
I'm
to
just going to say
anybody?
one thing real quick, just looking at that question again. I think sometimes people like to think about stainless, to buy things in stainless because it looks really nice and it's, we've heard it's really food safe. If you're buying new, stainless is incredibly expensive. So sometimes you can get good stainless stuff from like a restaurant auction or in Facebook Marketplace. I do not think that is necessary for the vast majority of things in a pack shed to be food safe. I would not recommend, for example, you spend $2,000 on a stainless steel triple wash sink or that type of thing. There's plenty of the ways you can get at a similar concept.
And there was one other question that did pop in, asking any floor plans or checklists out there that can be shared.
I am sure there are, one website that's really great is if you look up the website for University of Vermont Ag Engineering. I think Annalisa mentioned that at the start. They have like whole pages on just different pack sheds and breaking them down and their floor plans and what works and what doesn't. That's a really great resource for some things. I don't know, Joan, you kind of showed the floor plan, I guess, from above, but
Yeah, that's what we've had from above for our farm. I feel like there might be some references in the FSMA materials, but I'm just gonna browse here right now while we're chatting if there's any other questions that come up. Oh, thank you, Lauren.
yeah, I would also put a pitch that myself and Annalisa can do one-on-one consultations with farmers. So if you're thinking through your floor plan right now, or you're thinking through, does this make any sense? And you kind of want to talk through your specific situation, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us. And sometimes we can even go out to your farm or talk with you over Zoom or connect you with folks like Joan, but find different ways that you can kind of get assistance with your particular situation.
Can they reach you via like email, or do you have like your contact information?
Yeah, email is great. I'm putting in the chat right now the email address for myself and Annalisa. And yeah, we'd be more than happy to chat.
Awesome. If there's,
Um,
oh, go
so
ahead.
I say this is the blog post from UVM. This is maybe the one that Ariel's talking about. Um, it does have a pack shed layout with just some ideas about design, all the things that we basically talked about.
Oh,
Lighting, ramps, pallets, water, shelving, all that kind of thing. So this is and just a nice, simple PDF. Thanks, David. David says A to Z restaurant supply in Princeton is a great place to find used stainless equipment. That's good to know about. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can wrap up unless either of you have any more last minute comments.
okay, thanks. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.